Thank you. 10 or 15 minutes into the presentation, we're going to stop and give everybody a chance to either chime in or ask a question at that point. Then Scott will continue, and we'll have another chance towards the end to take questions or take suggestions or have a conversation, however you want to do that. I think most of you know Scott, and most of you have probably met him since he's been at our meetings for the past several times. Scott is a subject matter expert with CNA on the Smart Policing Project. He has a long involvement with Project Safe Neighborhoods. Prior to that, he was the research partner in St. Louis for the Strategic Approaches to Community Safety Initiative as a researcher, and he has been involved in research around gangs, criminal justice policy generally. I think one of the more interesting things for us today, and one of the things I really like about his resume, is that he's kind of figured out how to go to the source and talk to offenders and get information from and about offenders in several different ways over his career, and he's really an expert in those matters. I think he serves his university, his students, and law enforcement and criminal justice equally well as a kind of a very pragmatic scholar. So I want to thank Scott right now just for working with us on developing this webinar. I think you'll find it interesting, and as I said, you'll have a chance to chime in and ask questions as we go along. So before we do that, I would like to take a brief moment just to figure out a way to have everybody introduce themselves briefly so we know who's on the phone. We have the names up here, but we don't know exactly where you're from. So I'm going to kind of go down this list and just ask everybody to say hello for a minute before we start the presentation. Scott, we'll do you last.
All right.
There's a phone number here that ends in 4. That's probably the recording phone number. There's a participant from a 414 area code. Who's that?
That's going to be Stan Savage.
Stan, how are you?
I'm doing great. How's everybody?
Great. Okay, Joanne?
Hi, Joanne. I'm on there twice. Phone number ending 623. And then later on, Joanne Nelson from Glendale.
Very good. Who's got the 901 area code?
That would be us, Lupe Mora, with, here with Memphis Police Department and the U.S. Attorney.
Very good. Hi, Lupe.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Brenda?
Hi, everyone. This is Brenda Bond. I'm at Suffolk University in Boston. I'm the research partner with Lowell, Mass.
Thank you. Captain Taylor?
Yes, my name is Bill Taylor. I'm a captain with Lowell PD in charge of one of the sectors of the city, and welcome, and thank you very much.
Very good, sir. Daniel?
Hi, this is Daniel Webster. I'm at Johns Hopkins University in the Center for Gun Policy and Research, and I'm a research partner with Baltimore Police on their SPI project.
Great, thank you. Ms. Butler?
How are you, Chip? Hello, everyone. This is Demetra Butler. I'm with the Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police Department, working with the SPI Savannah Project.
Great. Frank?
Morning, everyone. Frank Balcom, Colby Brent, Glendale PD, Glendale, Arizona.
Making the news these days.
Yes, sir.
Iris? Okay. Jerry?
Yeah, I will stay on the line and talk. It's Jerry Ratcliffe, Professor of Criminal Justice at Temple University in Philadelphia.
Welcome, sir. Marianne?
Hi, Marianne Bellata from Lowell Police Department.
Good. Is anybody else on the phone from Memphis besides Lupe?
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves.
Very good.
You have Colonel Mays with MPD.
Lieutenant Colonel Starnes, MPD. John Campbell, District Attorney's Office.
Jelaine Harris, Senior Consultant, CCCR.
Very good. Mike.
Hi, Mike White from Arizona State University, and I'm the research partner for Glendale, Arizona.
Great. Shannon?
Hi, I'm Shannon Fahey. I'm the project coordinator here at Boston Police Department.
That's Boston, right?
Yep.
Good for you. TJ?
TJ Wilhan from the Albuquerque Police Department.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And Terry?
Terry Clay from Savannah State University, the research partner for the Savannah PD.
Wonderful. Is there anybody that I missed besides Scott? Oh, Vivian, why don't you say hello?
Hi, this is Vivian, and I work with CNA.
And this is Chip Stewart. I work with CNA as Senior Advisor.
Welcome, Chips.
Thank you.
Okay, Scott, let me turn it over to you. Let's get going.
Great. Thank you, Chip, and thank you, everybody, for joining us for the next 45 minutes or so. As Dr. Coldren mentioned, we'll call for questions about a third of the way through in about 15 minutes. We're going to talk this morning about the process of targeting offenders, a practice that's emerged from a variety of projects across the country. Probably the earliest origin was with the Boston Gun Project. We saw a number of the strategic approaches sites use it and use it effectively, as well as a number of the Project Safe Neighborhoods sites as well. One of the things that makes offender targeting appropriate in the Smart Policing initiative is that it is consistent with the 4 key principles that guide our project. Those principles, which we could all recite, being strategic management, analysis, research, and the employment of technology to address targeted problems. If we move now to the first substantive slide, we'll try and talk a little bit about what offender targeting is. We're all faced with a variety of challenges in responding to crime in our jurisdictions. But one of the things that seems to cut across almost all the jurisdictions, all the problem definitions, and is a focus of all the teams, is that there seems to be a small number of high-rate offenders that are responsible for a large proportion of crime. This chronic high-rate offending group of particularly troublesome people comes out of a long line of very high-quality research that's been funded by a variety of groups, probably most notably the Marvin Wolfgang work with delinquency in Philadelphia that finds that a relatively small proportion, 6 to 8% of all the juveniles account for over half of all the crimes. So if we're thinking about a strategic way to address crime and have an impact on crime, if we could identify this small group and do something with them or to them or for them that made us more effective, we'd have a real opportunity to reduce crime. We want to identify those individuals, and as we'll talk this morning, that isn't as easy as it sometimes might sound, but also couple that identification with a broad strategy that includes prosecution, it includes supervision, it includes intervention, it includes the policing. So as you think about your smart policing teams and you look around at your meetings, offender targeting is a strategy that calls for the inclusion of just about everyone around the table, including those community partners. And that's something I'm going to touch on a little bit down the road. This is an intervention that calls to use your resources, which are for all of us, limited and having increasing demands placed on them in the places where we all believe that they'll do the most good. Over time, we've learned that offender targeting can be a strategy or tool that produces really high-quality, highly efficient results for our intervention. So why would we do this? Maybe we've got an intervention going looking at prescription drugs or quick markets that seem to be plagued by high rates of crime, or drug markets or a variety of other things that are going on. Why should we take the offender targeting approach to deal with crime problems? Well, I think the most important reason is that it's a very efficient way to use our resources. It does what the Smart Policing Initiative calls for all of us to do, and that is to focus our efforts on a specific crime problem and a specific group of offenders. In the current vernacular of interventions, offender targeting also provides a force multiplier. It allows us to take a relatively small part of our unit or our organization or our team and produce much larger results than would otherwise be the case. Another important consideration, and a number of jurisdictions have found this to be the case in the past, is that offender targeting can enhance officer safety. When we do a good job identifying the high-rate offenders, when we make their identities known to officers, officers can take additional precautions around them to protect themselves from injuries or worse that often occur when interacting with such high-rate offenders. It also makes a statement to the public. One of the things we're all concerned with is demonstrating to the public that we really are doing something. We've all been a part of a number of initiatives through the years in which the claim is made, this time we're really serious. This time we really mean what we say. And over the years, many groups in the public, particularly in an ironic sense, those who experience the highest rates of victimization are the ones who become the most cynical. And what we need to do is to document to them that we're taking their crime problems seriously and we're addressing them. And offender targeting can do that. It does it largely through focused deterrence by placing our resources on the highest rate offenders. Again, that's 6% of offenders that are responsible for 50 or 55% of all the crime. In the same way that offender targeting announces to the community that we're taking their crime problems seriously, it also announces to offenders, we're looking at you. And while you may have thought in the past that you could skate around routine patrol or directed patrol or increased probation supervision, this is an intervention that's closing those loopholes that exist. This is an intervention that identifies you by name, by address, by associates, and pays attention to what you're doing in the same way that we've seen lever pulling work in the past. As we've already noted, offender targeting targets high-rate offenders. We obviously want to find those individuals that are causing the most trouble and the most mayhem in the community and do something about them. These are the people that have been chronic problems for the criminal justice system and for the community that we just haven't been able to get our hands on for a variety of reasons. Many times, if you think about warrants, I know in the city I used to live and work in St. Louis, there were more than 100,000 felony warrants in a city of only 340,000 residents. And this posed a problem about how do we identify who to go after with 100,000 warrants? Well, one of the things that an offender targeting strategy, again, by using the smart policing principles of strategic management, analysis, research, technology, and focus, that this strategy can allow us to do is identify the highest rate among those people wanted on warrants, or people already on supervision that we have a handle on and we can deal with most effectively. Often we target individuals who are already under the control of the criminal justice system. Maybe they're on probation. Maybe they're on parole. Maybe there's a warrant out there arrest. And we bring additional resources to bear the power of focusing a number of groups at the same time on these individuals and defining a relatively small number of them. These individuals may have been difficult to get a handle on for a variety of reasons, but when we focus and identify them and target them specifically, without overwhelming ourselves with 100,000 on our list of targeted offenders, we can certainly be much more effective. It's important, if we move to the next slide, to define how they're targeted, to identify them with an objective set of criteria. Again, because we're working in the Smart Policing Initiative, for which our motto is data analysis and solutions, we know that we're not just making this up by the seat of our pants, or we're not just getting someone's expert or informed opinion about what to do. We're going to have solid research behind our strategy, and that's nowhere more evident than with how we target people. Maybe those criteria include arrests. Maybe it includes individuals who commit offenses while they're under supervision, perhaps on probation, perhaps on parole. Maybe we target individuals who have prior convictions or who have committed specific offenses. That's a task that your task force can best define and identify by reviewing your problem, by working with your research partner to identify those most troublesome individuals from the information that they have. It's key, it's absolutely essential that multiple agencies participate in providing information and preferences about who to target. But it's also the case that once we get a set of criteria, we set a threshold and say, for example, everyone who's got 3 felony arrests in the last 4 months, or everyone on probation who committed a new offense within the first 4 weeks of being put on probation and wasn't remanded for custody. So we identify some set of criteria, some number of offenses, and define a threshold. This usually results in the development of some kind of a list of the individuals that we're going to target. This list, again, has to be developed based on these objective criteria, what it takes to get on the list, how many of those, and then what the threshold is. It's important that we have a manageable list. We don't want to set ourselves up for failure by having a list of thousands of names. That's not being very strategic. We probably also want to be strategic in targeting a specific geographic area. If we take, for example, a city the size of Los Angeles or Philadelphia, 2 smart policing participants that have large geographic areas, or Glendale, which has also got a large geographic area. We don't want to do offender targeting across the entire city. We want to focus it in some particular way. There's lots of considerations about developing the list, but identifying a manageable number of names to be on that list is really important. Prior experience tells us that 25 to 50 is about the right number, and that as we are successful in pulling people off the top of the list, so let's say we had a list of 30, and we went down that list and targeted the first 10, and we were able to make arrests of 5 or 6 in the first couple of months. Then everybody on the bottom would move up toward the top of that list, and we may consider adding new names to the list. When this was done in St. Louis, for example, we had a list of 50 names, but we targeted the top 10. 4 of those 10 were arrested and prosecuted within the first 2 months. That allowed us both to demonstrate success to the task force and to the community, but also to go to offenders and say, we're looking at you. We're paying careful attention. It's important to use objective information, arrests, conviction, probation, parole, though there are some jurisdictions that have used more subjective information like nominations. This is an area that experience has taught us we should tread very carefully into. This can produce and introduce some long-held biases, but it can also allow us to miss individuals who've kind of flown under the radar. So a number of jurisdictions have found when using subjective information, the sergeants, the patrol officers, the probation officers, the community members who say, Yeah, it's that guy who lives at the corner of 46th Avenue and Thomas, or it's the individual on the 3000 block of Wren Boulevard. Some jurisdictions have tried to correlate the objective and subjective information and found that generally there's a pretty strong correlation. But we think that it's important to rely almost exclusively on objective information. Some jurisdictions, Kansas City, during Project Safe Neighborhoods, assign points based on the criteria in their ways to get on the list, and you had to have a certain number of points to make the list, and then the list was ranked from highest points to lowest points. A question that many jurisdictions will face is how many other jurisdictions to be involved. If you're in, for example, if you're in Lowell, there are a variety of jurisdictions around you. If you're in Boston, there are a number of smaller jurisdictions that are around the city. And much as we would wish they would, offenders don't respect the geographic borders of cities very well, and they move around. So pulling other jurisdictions in, pulling other agencies in. There were Project Safe Neighborhoods interventions that took place in rural areas that used the Park Service. They used the Forest Service. Oftentimes there are larger cities that have police that just monitor parks and public spaces in cities, and they may be useful partners to involve. It's worth giving some careful thought to what additional agencies and partners might be involved. It's a truism that any list is only as good as the information that's used to put it together. That's really true in all of our smart policing initiatives, but I think particularly so in targeting offenders. One of the things that can frustrate groups is we want to get out and do something. We all have serious crime problems in our community. We all want to make sure we're demonstrating to ourselves, to our agencies, to our communities, to offenders, that we're actively engaged in doing things. But the worst thing to do is do the ready, fire, aim, is to not engage in that middle part of the smart policing initiative that relies on analysis and relies on research and just runs ahead and does something to be able to do something. So I would encourage every jurisdiction that's going to use an offender targeting intervention to work hard to get a quality list, to test your criteria, to develop some sample lists, to see how they work, and not be afraid to change. A valid list, an effective list, is one that's built on good information, but also one that's reviewed periodically. Names should be removed from the list based on criteria that you agree on as a task force. A number of individuals are going to be sent away to prison. They should come off of our list. People are going to move out of state. They should come off the list. Some individuals will die or suffer serious debilitating injuries. We should take them off the list, but also offenders who get the message and are inactive for a period of time. If that's 6 months, if it's a year. In the same way that groups like CalGang and gang lists have had criteria to remove individuals from the list, we should do the same, because it'll make us more effective, because it'll make our lists better. We want to make sure we use current information. Sometimes research partners lament that when they get a records management system dump of data or calls for service, it's 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years old. We ought to work with, as much as possible, recent information, because it makes us more effective. We think, too, that triangulation is important, using information from 2 or more different data sources. So we might want to use arrest and probation, or prosecution and arrest data, or RMS, or computer-aided dispatch data as well. There are concerns as well about the privacy of the data. Who gets to see the list is an important question. Some law enforcement agencies are reluctant to share much information. That's less of a problem in the smart policing initiative because our participants understand both the importance of sharing but also the power of sharing a variety of sources of information. Chip, I think this might be an appropriate time to address questions that our participants might have before we move on to the last half of the presentation.
Very good. I know there's a few of you out there that are already actively maintaining lists. Savannah, for sure. You have your top 100. Brenda, I think you guys are working on lists, and Lowell, too. Do you have anything to add or any questions at this point?
This is Brenda. Actually, we do. We're in the process in Lowell of developing a list, but this conversation has been great because part of the thing that we've been struggling with, and obviously Marianne or Captain Taylor can add to this, is what criteria. That criteria is definitely been part of our ongoing regular conversations, and for me as the research partner, that's key because what I will be looking at is, okay, so what is it we expect to happen? And so that criteria really feeds into the measures that we use to decide whether or not first of all, what's the appropriate strategy? And then how do we know if what we're doing is working? So I'm not sure I have anything to add other than the process challenges that are involved in this.
Yeah, I think we probably couldn't stress the issue about the criteria enough. It's not just having a quality list, but as Scott alluded to, and as I'm sure some of you know, people will challenge this list from many different perspectives and perhaps legally. And if you don't have an objective criteria that you apply consistently, you're going to run into trouble down the road. That's for sure. Not just internally, but maybe from the perspective of others. Demetra, let me put you on the spot for a minute, if you don't mind, because I know you guys have a point system, and you guys did develop some, for specific criteria for your list.
Yeah, I was hoping that Terry would speak up, considering that, we kind of had to redevelop some things based on the federal point system and coming up and establishing an actual guideline. But just as what has been covered thus far, we sat on the table and we came up with the list criteria of those who we were really looking for, who were causing their problems, by choosing specific offenses first and foremost. And then we went about the geographical area where we were having most of our high crime areas, which would be our central precinct area. So in terms of how we got to that point, it was laboring at first because we got information from the Department of Corrections, and we went through and we rated everyone based on their criminal offenses and their current offense being a violent offense, because that's what we're targeting, the violent and gun-related charges. And that's how we keep the standing list going. And as discussed, we have individuals that we found that were, that some are deceased, some of them are no longer here in the area. They have since come off the list, and we constantly keep regenerating the list and updating and pulling from, the initial pool that we received from the Department of Corrections. So I feel really good about this so far.
I would say that if you encounter some frustration that it's not moving fast enough, you're probably doing things the right way, because getting the list right is so important. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that may come from the community. Did you find that 100 was a manageable number?
Overall, because we were already working with probationers and parolees, it was manageable because we already have police officers that work with a reentry population, is what we were calling them. So in effort, it was just like a natural and normal thing for us to go into. And what we found is that individuals who we have targeted specifically and told them why we were targeting them, they've been receptive until they were telling a friend to come down to SIP, they'll help you. So it's been a real kind of, I guess you can say, a twist that we weren't expecting from the police officer's perspective, as well as those who are receiving the services.
If I can chime in.
That doesn't fit neatly in an outcome evaluation as a % reduction in crime, but I think it's the kind of anecdote and process story that lets us know that we really are, when they tell their friends, we really are reaching our target population.
Yeah, you can't count it, but, yeah.
If I can chime in on this, too.
A Facebook page.
We're actually only managing half of our list because we're divided up into a test group of 50 and an actual applying the intervention of 50.
I see.
Yay.
Oh, great.
Good for you.
Shall we continue on?
Hang on just for 1 second. Mike White, are you on the phone? Okay. Go ahead, Scott.
Okay, thanks all. One of the other principles of smart policing is learning from each other. And certainly, if I were a site about to kick off a list, I'd want to be on the phone with Savannah that sounds like they got a great project going, and with Lowell that sounds like they're doing the right things to work through the early steps. So you got a list. What do you do next? How do you make it work? Well, one of the first principles is that the most effective list is a list that's widely shared among the active participants. That secret list you keep in the desk and never show anybody, that doesn't produce much in the way of results. And in today's world, if you can make that list available electronically, it's far more useful. A number of jurisdictions have, under PSN, taken their list and linked it to the CAD system so that when a police officer encounters an individual in the field, perhaps on a traffic or a pedestrian stop, and runs their name for a pedigree through the records management system, if they're on that list, the name pops up. In St. Louis, it popped up with a big red flashing star behind it. So the officer knew this is somebody I ought to pay careful attention to for my safety, but I also want to make sure that maybe I call for backup, maybe I run more extensive pedigree information, maybe I check for outstanding warrants. Specialized units, whether it's CID or narcotics or stolen property, or even routine patrol can also be brought in to use these lists. Patrol officers are often looking to make cases and do more than to just clear calls off their MDT, and having access to such a list can help them. When the RMS issue I already mentioned, web-based applications can be developed. They have been in a number of jurisdictions that show criminal background information. And again, one of the things that's a key to smart policing is reviewing the strategy, is taking a look at what's worked and what hasn't. And if the names that come from one agency never seem to pop up, maybe they don't belong on the list. Maybe we should work to get other names. We brought in some participation. I think it's been useful to learn about what other jurisdictions are doing, what information they find most helpful, and to know that you can depend on both the current smart policing participants, but also future participants to help you develop your intervention, if it's targeting offender, for example, but also when you hit a bump. One of the things we all know in criminal justice is there's rarely an intervention or strategy that we develop, pull off the shelf, roll out, bam, it works, crime goes away, and we all declare victory and go home. They all encounter some challenges, and having access to individuals who have encountered and met those challenges is important. There's a number of operational questions that arise in the use and implementation of offender targeting strategies. Do we tell people they're on the list? A number of jurisdictions have done so. There are some that don't. There are some that say, we don't want them to know because we want to catch them. There are other jurisdictions that say, we want everybody and all their buddies to know. And there are ways to announce that publicly. Chip mentioned the use of Facebook, and I know there are some jurisdictions that have put up on Facebook, here's our high-rate offenders that we're looking for. Can you help us? That's one way to very effectively publicize the list. Like the rest of us, offenders' lives and some of their crimes are lived online, and reaching them and reaching their associates through the Internet is an interesting strategy. We do need to be concerned, though, because jurisdictions have been challenged that the list might be just another form of racial profiling. It might be just another form of targeting minority residents in the community. That links us back to the critical importance of analysis and research and using objective criteria to develop our list. We want to make sure that our list isn't just the 12 people we know the most about. We want to make sure it's the 12 people who fit a certain set of objective criteria. The nominations issue, the use of subjective criteria, is an important one to consider at this juncture. Many groups stay away from it for fear of the challenge of racial bias. And then the other important issue is what impact the community has in putting individuals on the list. Every police captain or commander that has a precinct or a district knows that at those monthly community meetings, there are residents who come forward and say, you got to do something about this guy or that woman. She's letting them sell drugs out of the house. This is a real problem for our jurisdiction. What do we do with that information? Do we put that individual on the list? Certainly it would seem appropriate to check the criteria for that individual, see if they make it on the list. You don't have to be on an offender target list in order to get increased attention from the police, and that may be, or probation, that may be one way to deal with the nomination issue. But we think it's important that sites that are considering the offender targeting strategy anticipate some of these problems and discuss them. Technology, if we move to the next of the slides, technology is often the problem, but it's often the solution to that problem. And I think that technology can really help us enhance the use of offender targeting lists. Putting those lists on Facebook, making them more widely known, can generate tips. It can generate information from the community. It can let the community know that you're supporting their efforts to make their neighborhood safe. I remember attending a community meeting with a district commander, about a dozen years ago, and a somewhat elderly woman stood up in the back of the room and spoke and said, look, I want all of you to know that just because I'm poor and just because I'm African American, that doesn't mean I like crime. I hate crime more than you do because I live with it. The community can be a valuable ally for us and for offender targeting strategies. Getting that information out to them through technology can be a useful tool for us to use. Do we put it in the CAD? Do we have officer alerts come up when a name is run through a records management system? We can also know that technology can enhance communication among law enforcement, probation, parole, prosecution, outreach groups to make our interventions more successful. There are a number of challenges that we face. Some of the sites have faced these. It sounds like Lowell is at the early stages of facing and overcoming some of these challenges. And I would take the questions on this slide and ask them to my team if I was about to implement an offender targeting strategy. What are the challenges we anticipate? How are we going to implement this program? How are we going to respond to the challenges? How are we going to convince the offenders that this time we really mean it? I know, having participated in dozens of offender-targeted meetings, that sometimes mothers were invited. mothers can be very effective allies in working with offenders. And I'll never forget the night I was in a church basement and a young man was smarting off and mouthing off and talking during a presentation by an assistant U.S. attorney. We all were stunned and silenced by a slap in the back of the room, and his mother had chosen to knock him upside of the head to get his attention and tell him that he needed to pay attention or he was going to end up in prison. It's also the case that we might want to, Chip mentioned my long-standing interest in interviewing offenders and learning what they have to say. We might want to think of offenders as our focus group here. If they are being targeted and they don't know about it, then our message isn't penetrating the right market. You know, we can put a PSA on the classical music station, and we can put bulletin boards up over time, and we can run ads on, Judge Joe Brown and Judge Judy in the morning. But if our offenders aren't seeing those shows, if they aren't seeing those bulletin boards, we're not reaching our target group. So a focus group of offenders that says, do you know what we're up to? Have you heard of this? Do your friends know about it? What's your response to this? Can be important ways to enhance the power and effectiveness of our intervention. We want to move through some examples, and you can find more documentation about these examples up on the Smart Policing website under resources that were developed in Project Safe Neighborhoods. All of them integrate the key principles of smart policing, strategic management, data analysis and research, technology, focused interventions. In St. Louis, the intervention was known as the WOW Project. Major Harry Hager in the St. Louis Police Department came up with this name after we developed a list based on an agreed set of criteria. He looked at the list and said, we know these guys. They're the worst of the worst. They're the WOW list. And that became kind of the rallying call, pay attention to the WOW list across St. Louis. In order to make the WOW list in St. Louis, you had to have 3 of 5 criteria. 2 or more arrests for first-degree assault, 6 or more felony arrests in the prior 9 months, be a documented gang member, be on probation at the time of the most recent arrest, have 2 or more felony convictions. And you might think that we had a hard time finding people to be on this list. This gave us a list of hundreds of individuals that we had to then rank order by most of these criteria. It's important that the research partner play a critical role in refining the list and responding to concerns on the part of the task force. We brought the data to task force meetings, and when they'd say, gee, what happens if you emphasize 3 felony arrests for ag assault 1 more and assign it heavier weight, we could run that analysis in a minute or 2 and give them the results and update it. And I think that sort of interactive work in real time versus going home and producing a report 6 months later is what we ought to strive to provide in smart policing. Indianapolis had the VIPER Program. These seem to generate fancy names. Violence Impact Enhanced Response Program. Individuals had to be 18 to 30 years of age, have 2 or more arrests for a group of offenses that included murder, robbery, carjacking, rape, felony, weapons possession, criminal recklessness, be identified and targeted for prosecution, and then be individuals who the police and the prosecutor could agree that they could work together on in an effective way. VIPER became so effective in Indianapolis that they developed what they called the Super VIPER Program. Maybe that's an even more venomous intervention. And those were the individuals who ranked in the top 10 on the VIPER list. Boston developed what it called the impact players. And they identified impact players as individuals with a large number of prior arrests. Boston was particularly concerned about community challenges to the validity and fairness of the list. They used nomination, but it had to be for individuals who had a known involvement in gangs, guns, or drugs. Now, one of the challenges by using a fairly broad criteria, and Shannon and others from Boston, you may remember this, or you want to face it. You may face it in the future. This kind of a set of criteria produced a list with more than 800 individuals who were identified citywide. Now, they were targeted for arrest or placed in an intervention or prevention program, so they did have a variety of resources to use, but it's generally the case that the broader the list, the more difficult it is to focus. One of the things we know, now being a couple years into the Smart Policing Initiative, is that we've got to keep our strategy fresh. If our police interventions, our probation, our parole, our prosecution, our community involvement, our partnerships, if we don't keep them fresh, and this is a key really to all smart policing practices, if we don't keep them fresh, they get stale, they become routine, people aren't as enthusiastic, they get done less often. And it's important to have that periodic assessment of how it's going. And while the research partner should play a key role in this, it's also the case that everybody ought to say, gee, you know, my officers are burned out from doing this all the time, or they're bored with this. We need to give them a fresh challenge. And sites have to be willing to say, look, this part isn't working. We had high hopes for probation being involved. It hasn't worked out that way. We've got to move on to something else. I think all of us recognize that working with community partners can be a real challenge, perhaps the most challenging part of any of our interventions. And I would tell you that that's the part you ought to keep your eye on the most closely and be most willing to change if things seem to have hit a dead end. The media is not always our friend, but they can be our friend when we use them and provide them with stories to help publicize success. And certainly Glendale has received a lot of very favorable and I think high priority press on their work attempting to do something about crime at Quick Marts and then specifically at Circle K stores. And there's been real good publicity, radio and print about their interventions. It's important to know when to move on to a new strategy, and I think that's really consistent with our principles of strategic management, with our emphasis on analysis and research. If you use an offender targeting strategy, you ought to meet regularly to review the list. You ought to consider both dropping and adding names and changing the strategy up. Sometimes we may want to do warrant enforcement. Sometimes we may want to do home visits for probationers. Sometimes we may want to call targeted groups of offenders, and maybe their mothers or their wives or their kids, in for a meeting to tell them what we're doing and why it's important. Reviewing the criteria are really important steps to make sure the list stays fresh and that our interventions are fresh. A number of questions as we move toward the end and open up for questions again, I'll leave you with. One of the things we want to make sure is that our offender targeting list isn't sitting off in the parking lot way away from everything else that we're doing. It ought to be integrated and into the middle of and complement our other strategies. So if we're doing saturated and targeted or directed patrol in a particular neighborhood, we ought to look for offenders on a list who reside or commit their crimes in that neighborhood. We ought to work to make technology make our lists more effective and get a real force multiplier by either streamlining them, prioritizing, or publicizing them. We want to assess whether our community partnership and community groups are active enough and strong enough and trust us enough to involve them in helping to develop the list, in identifying strategies, and in identifying individuals to be on the list. The use of offender targeting lists can strain partnerships. There can be tensions between police, between prosecution, between probation and parole. But an exercise, an effort like, an intervention like targeting offenders can also strengthen the ties between those groups. We want to wrap up today's webinar, and I want to thank all the participants again, and in particular Savannah and Lowell, who've offered their very useful expertise with final thoughts that others might have to offer, or questions that they might raise for Chip or myself or the rest of the group.
Great, Scott. Thank you very much. Let's just, I've been making a few notes here, Scott, and I don't know if you had a chance to kind of watch the chat as it's been going on while you've been talking, but let's just see if anybody has any final thoughts or questions at this point. I do want to mention that everybody who participated will get via email a quick little questionnaire about evaluating the session and recommending how we might approach future sessions. But for now, let's just see if anybody has any thoughts or comments. I'm going to have a few things to follow up on. Anybody?
Hello, this is Stan.
Stan, yeah, go ahead.
I had a question, and maybe Scott or maybe someone else informing. I mean, a lot of departments, even including here in Atlanta, they have initiatives where they try to target, some of these repeat offenders. Anybody had any look in terms of using the strategy in terms of also trying to target their associates and coming up with strategies to, identify some of their associates, whether it's through, maybe the school resource officers or, any other type of resources like that?
Great question. Thank you, Stan. Again, offender targeting is more effective if it can integrate a variety of other pieces of information. And the school resource officer, and you're right, school resource officers are a wealth of knowledge that we don't use often enough. Some groups, I know Kansas City in PSN identified a very small list, and they took everybody on that list as kind of representing the spoke in a wheel, and they did try and look for their known associates, people they were arrested with, people they hung out with, and they tried to move out from the center of that spoke, that individual, to the known associates, the people they lived with, the people they were arrested with, the people they hung out with. And that's a real effective way to deal with the network nature of much crime with that we encounter. And especially, when we think about gangs and gang interventions, that's a useful way, as George Tita demonstrated in Hollenbeck in Los Angeles a number of years ago.
All right, thanks.
This is Colonel Mays in Memphis.
Yes, Colonel.
Okay, one observation, one question. The observation is concerning the list. We did develop a list in our SPI, and we called it a high-profile offender list, and we utilized federal criteria in ranking or rating these individuals. Now, the issue is we have high volumes of criminals. Similar to Boston, the 800 identified, we have numerous criminals. While we're waiting on the ones on the list to commit an offense, we have other individuals who are, wreaking havoc in the community. So my observation has to do with it's a time-sensitive matter, and it's particularly with the officers. You need information quickly. You need a fast-moving list, a fast-changing, quickly changing list. Now, my question has to do with the revealing of the list to the public. Of course, maybe other departments are in good with the media and so forth, and the community. We are pretty good, but there are those who are distrustful of your police departments, and they look at the list regarding profiling. There are matters of litigation. So my question is, would you revisit what you mentioned about profiling and avoiding the media attacks that many departments deal with? in revealing these lists? And are you saying reveal all aspects of the list, or what?
Well, I think if you use an objective set of criteria, and a number of PSN jurisdictions did use established federal criteria, because it gives you kind of useful cover to say, well, there are objective criteria. If you make those criteria known, that can blunt some of the criticism. You all know better than I that no matter what you do, no matter how objective the criteria, there's going to be some folks who don't like the list. In St. Louis, 49 of the 50 individuals on the WOW list were African American. That was information that a number of people in the community didn't like and were very vocal in complaining about. We had a number of community participants who spoke up in response to that, though, and said, hey, these are the people who are producing mayhem in our community. And while it may be the case that they're mostly African American or Hispanic or poor or live in one neighborhood, if the list is developed based on objective criteria, you're on much firmer footing than if you say, well, you know, 3 sergeants put this together based on who they don't like. If you involve the community in helping to agree on the criteria, then you do have, again, a firmer basis to say to the public, look, this has been run past community individuals, and it has some validity in that regard. It does pose an interesting challenge, though, about whether you make the criteria public and the list public. And I think the easier thing to do, I don't think it's as effective, is to not make the names on the list public. If you make the names public, you get much more community involvement and community buy-in. And I think it may be worth whatever criticisms that may be forthcoming.
Thank you.
But, hey, Scott, there's an interesting comment, I don't know if you picked up on it, from the folks in Glendale as you were talking, and I think it's pretty obvious that there's a real strong and a natural link between these kinds of lists and nuisance abatement activities, and, developing lists of tenants and repeat arrest tenants and that kind of thing. So I think they're trying to work with the apartment managers in Glendale to start to do a better job of identifying these repeat offending tenants, and I think they're running into similar problems. Is that right, Frank?
Yes, one of the biggest concerns that we have is, unfortunately, they tend to move from one apartment complex to another complex. One of the things that we've tried to do is basically utilizing some of our SPI initiatives is to target these people and track them, but unfortunately some of these, all the apartment complexes are fearful of putting them in some type of list or even exchanging information based on the advice of their attorney and because of threats of violating some type of fair housing standards.
Well, again, the point made earlier about using federal criteria, federally subsidized housing has a very strict set of rules about who can live in that housing and who can't. If a police department were to adopt the criteria that are used for individuals to move into federally subsidized housing and apply those, it would seem you would have an objective set of criteria. I also know that a number of jurisdictions, and Chip and I are familiar with kind of a central Illinois jurisdiction, Kankakee, that's used landlord and management training very effectively to deal with troublesome tenants. There are a variety of ways to reach out and have an impact on high-rate offenders and individuals in the community. Targeted offender list is one. Troublesome tenants is another. Directed high-intensity probation is another, and working with landlords, and I'm not familiar if that's going on in Glendale, Frank, but landlord training can be a very effective way to deal with troublesome tenants.
We've actually done some of that under acquire-free multi-housing training, but the problem that we have is we want to have the ability to track a person if he's a problem person, say, for example, being involved in criminal activity. We know that he's going to move into another apartment complex, but the fear is the advice you're getting from their attorneys. And I know that in regards to public housing, we can probably enforce some of those, but once we get into these apartment complexes, it's kind of tough to get their legal advisors or attorneys to allow us that opportunity to basically just per se create a repeat offender list, and that's what we're trying to get into. But I know I sent this out to our CAD team and community action team, and they did some research not only locally but also within the other states. And I just wanted to, if we need to create a coalition, then I think that's what we need to do, similar to with our Circle K.
Yeah, I would urge you to go, if you go look at, and Chip, you're going to have to help me here, both what Kankakee, Illinois did, but also was it Rockford or was it Ottawa, one of the north or northwest jurisdictions, Chip, that's become a model nationally for landlord screening of tenants. We'll find that information and get it posted, Frank.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of resources that are available on this issue, and we'll start to pull some of that together and make sure that it's highlighted on the website. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, so Scott, just one other general question. I'm guessing that most of the sites that we're working with in smart policing do not have community representation on their working groups that are developing these lists. Is that a fair assessment for the people on the phone?
Yes.
Yes, from Lowell PD, I'm very interested in that component of this. Currently, we do not have community involvement in this project, and I think we'd be very interested in that component.
I think it's a challenging concept, but I know Scott has mentioned this. It will take you a long way, if you manage it correctly, to avoiding some of these criticisms that you're anticipating, and it's good practice. So maybe we'll take a look at some more information about that as well, and see if we can get direct out to the website. Okay.
And in that context, I would urge you to think of the community as yet another source of information. They know which mothers let the kids deal drugs out of the house. They know which kids in the neighborhoods have guns. They can be very useful. And when you think about several of the Weed and Seed projects from the 90s that had very effective community involvement, I think, some of those models are out there. That doesn't mean it's easy. If it were easy, we'd all be doing it, and we'd have cut our problems, by a big percentage. It's hard, but it also can pay big dividends.
Okay, so I think we're going to start to wind down here. I'm happy to entertain any other comments or questions that come up. I want to remind everybody about a couple things. As I said, you will get an email request to review and assess how this session went. I encourage you to pay attention to that. Some of you know this, maybe not everybody knows it, but this is the 4th webinar that we have done with Smart Policing. So I mentioned that we have one that John Eck has put together. We have another one that we did with Cynthia Lum on performance measurement. We have one that we did with Hildy on some outreach issues. And given this conversation, it might be a good idea for us to maybe revisit one or two of those, or maybe reschedule them for some of the newer sites, or if you've had some turnover in your current site. So as you're filling out your assessment of the session, give some thought to that. Let us know if you think a repeat of one of those would be a good idea, and then now that we have the recording capability, we could repeat it and record it. So that's something to think about, and obviously if there are other sessions that you think would be helpful, We're kind of warming up to this format here. So if you think it's going to be helpful in other ways, let us know. And we've made a number of notes about things to follow up on in terms of getting some more information and getting it up on the website. We will take care of that in short order. Anything else from anybody? Scott, I want to just tip my hat to you. You're a true showman. Good work. Good focus to your presentation. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you all.